The clock started the moment Dara swallowed the capsule. She didn't think of it as a mistake. Mistakes were things you did without information. She'd had all the information. The black market pharmacist had been very thorough, and she'd swallowed it anyway because the job required it, and the job was the only thing left in her life that resembled a reason to keep breathing. The capsule was called a Starfall. On the streets of what remained of Kuala Remnant, people paid 4 months of ration credits to feel what it did to you. Dara had taken it for free because the job required her nervous system running at a frequency that no sober human could sustain, and because she was, by any reasonable measure, desperate. The pharmacist had told her 90 minutes before the euphoria peaks. After that, fine motor control goes first, then judgment. Then you stop caring about anything except the light behind your eyes, and someone has to carry you home before you wander into traffic or a collector sweep. She had 90 minutes. She calmed Reyes. Reyes was eating noodles from a paper sleeve in the shadow of a collapsed transit arch when his wrist unit buzzed. He looked at the caller ID, set down the noodles, and said something anatomically impossible about Dara's decision-making. Then he answered. "Tell me," he said, "I took it." Silence. The kind of silence that meant he was calculating how angry he was allowed to be before it stopped being useful. Reyes and Dara had worked together, off and on, for 6 years. They were not friends in any clean sense of the word. They were something worse, people who knew each other's tells, each other's tics, each other's particular flavors of recklessness. They had stolen things together that neither of them talked about anymore. They had also, on 2 occasions, stolen things from each other, which was a different kind of intimacy. "Why?" he said. Not a question. An accusation with the question mark filed off. The Tessavar vault runs on a biometric lattice calibrated to the collective sensory spectrum. You know this. I know you know this. You need to be running at collector baseline to spoof the lattice, which is what the Starfall does, for 90 minutes, 87 now. Another silence. She could hear him breathing. She could hear, distantly, the click and grind of the city around him, generators cycling, something large moving through the fog 2 streets over. The collectors moved in the fog. They always had since the first ships came down and changed the sky and the math of survival in one long, terrible afternoon. Tall things, 8-limbed, sensorially hyperactive in ways that human neuroscience had needed 4 years and a war to begin to understand. The Tessavar Collective had not come to destroy humanity. They had come to harvest it, which was, Dara had always felt, considerably worse. "Where are you?" Ray said. "Sub-District 9. Corner of what used to be Jalan Bukit Bintang. That's 6 minutes from the vault entrance. 86 minutes now." She heard him swear again, quieter this time. Heard the sound of paper hitting the ground, the noodles abandoned, heard him moving. "You owe me," he said. "Add it to the list." He found her leaning against a wall that had once been the exterior of a shopping complex and was now just a surface for people to stencil their dead on. Names, dates, small drawings. The wall had gotten long. Dara was touching one of the names with 2 fingers, not reading it, just touching it. The way you touch something you're trying to remind yourself is real. Reyes looked at her eyes. They had gone slightly gold at the edges, the Starfall metabolizing, her neural chemistry climbing toward the collective's resting state. It was wrong in the specific way that all wrong things about the occupation were wrong. Seamless, biological, a human body pretending to be something it wasn't in order to survive an hour. "You look terrible," he said. "You're 6 minutes late. I had noodles. How were they?" "Terrible." He fell into step beside her. "Walk me through it." She talked while they moved. The Tessavar Collective kept its confiscated goods in a vault system beneath what had been the Patronus district. Technology, medicines, art, the accumulated material of a city's worth of human life, stripped methodically from residences in the first 2 years of the occupation and filed away like someone else's paperwork. The vault was designed for collector administrators. Biometric locks calibrated to their sensory output, atmosphere processors tuned to their respiratory preferences, lighting in a spectrum that gave humans immediate and spectacular headaches. It was not designed to be broken into by two people who, between them, had a combined 11 outstanding warrants with the human resistance and a long, complicated history of stealing from each other. The inner lock reads thermal and pheromonal signature simultaneously, Dara said. Collector specific. The Starfall upregulates human pheromonal output along the Tessavar range. I'll pass the scan. And the thermal? That's your part. She glanced at him sideways. You still have the emitter? He patted his jacket. I have the emitter, and it works. It worked when I tested it, on a collective lock, on a simulation of a collective lock, which I built myself, from memory, which is either impressive or terrifying. Can't it be both? She almost smiled. He caught it and filed it away, the way he filed away all of Dara's almost smiles, evidence of something she kept behind glass. The vault entrance was a service corridor that the collective had repurposed with characteristic thoroughness. The original tile had been resurfaced with something organic and matte that absorbed sound. The fluorescent strips had been replaced with bioluminescent filaments that pulsed at intervals tuned to collector calm, which, for humans, produced a low-grade unease that made your hands shake if you stood in it long enough. Reyes's hands were shaking before they reached the door. He'd been in worse. 81 minutes, Dara said, not looking at a clock. The Starfall was doing something to her time perception. She'd warned him about this. She could feel the drug climbing now, the edges of her thoughts going crystalline and too fast, the world acquiring a hyperclarity that was almost pleasant and would become, she knew, very bad. Let's not linger. The outer door yielded to Reyes's emitter after 40 seconds that felt, to both of them, considerably longer. The inner corridor required Dara to stand in front of the lock panel and breathe slowly while it read her. She felt it scanning, felt the Starfall in her blood, responding to the scan like a key turning in a lock it was never meant to open. The wrongness of it physical, a pressure behind her sternum, her body doing something it wasn't built to do and doing it anyway, because she had asked it to, and it was, when pressed, unreasonably cooperative. The lock opened. That is, Reyes said quietly, the most disturbing thing I've ever watched work. You've seen me crack a Breguet safe. This is more disturbing than that. They went in. The vault was cold and vast and full of other people's lives, not metaphorically, literally. There were racks of shelving stretching back into the dimness, and the shelves held objects, thousands of them, tagged with collective notation that meant nothing to either of them and everything to whoever had owned these things a year ago. A child's bicycle, orange, with one wheel slightly bent. A collection of medical equipment still in sterile packaging. Framed photographs, stacked in rows like they were inventory, faces looking out from behind the glass with expressions that had no idea they'd end up here. Musical instruments. Books. A crate of emergency rations that had expired by the date stamps 18 months ago. Reyes stood very still for a moment. Dara touched his arm, not a gesture she made often. We're here for the interface core, she said. The Resistance needed it. Collective communication hardware, capable of being reverse-engineered into something that might, eventually, compromise the Tessavar network enough to matter. A long shot. But long shots were the only shots anyone had taken for 3 years, and some of them, improbably, had landed. I know, Reyes said. He moved. They worked. This was the part of working with Reyes that Dara had always, reluctantly respected. The man was precise when it counted. His hands stopped shaking the moment. There was something specific to do with them. He found the interface core in the 3rd row of the technical cache, an object about the size of a human torso, cased in collective alloy, that had no business being as light as it was, and he had it, disconnected and wrapped in signal-dampening cloth before Dara finished her sweep of the room. 63 minutes, she said. And then, we have company. The collector came in through the far end of the vault. It was smaller than average, which made it about twice the mass of a large human man. 8 limbs, 4 load-bearing, 4 manipulative, all of them moving with the characteristic fluid efficiency that still, 3 years in, made something animal in Dara's brain try to file it under wrong. It was breathing. The Tessavar didn't breathe exactly, but they processed atmosphere in a way that produced sound, a rhythmic cycling that humans tended to find, instinctively, deeply unpleasant. It hadn't seen them yet. It was checking inventory, routine sweep. Reyes looked at Dara. Dara looked at Reyes. This was the part of their partnership that neither of them could have explained to anyone else. The conversation that happened without words, made of 6 years of shared jobs and mutual betrayals, and the specific grammar of people who have, on more than one occasion, had to trust each other with their lives, despite not entirely trusting each other with anything else. Reyes pointed at himself and then toward the left. Dara pointed at herself and then toward the right. They moved. What happened next was not graceful. It was not the kind of thing you could choreograph. Reyes knocked a rack of medical equipment over, intentionally a noise drawer, and the collector swung toward it with the speed that always caught humans off guard the first time, and still caught them off guard the second time, because intellectually, knowing something is faster than you, and viscerally experiencing it were different categories of information. Dara came in from the right with a device that she'd never mentioned to Reyes because she'd been fairly confident he'd object to her having it. It was a Tessavar neural interrupter, collective issue, which she had acquired from a source she was not going to name in a scenario that she was not going to describe, and it worked on collectors the way a hard strike to the temple works on humans, not lethally, not permanently, just enough. The collector went down. It would be up again in minutes. They needed to be out in seconds. "What was that?" Reyes said. "A tool. Where did you get a collective neural interrupter?" "I didn't tell you about it for a reason. That reason being, you would have objected to me having it." He picked up the wrapped interface core. He looked at her for a moment with an expression that was not quite admiration and not quite exasperation, and was, possibly, the intersection of both. "Do you have anything else you haven't told me about?" "Probably." They ran. Out through the corridor, back through the biometric door, out into the fog and the gray morning air of Koala Remnant, with the interface core between them and the clock running down, and the Starfall doing something to Dara's peripheral vision that was, she noted clinically, starting to become a problem. Colors were bleeding at the edges. Sounds were arriving at the wrong times, slightly off from the moment that caused them, like the world had developed a small but consistent lag. Reyes steered her. His hand on her elbow, practical, not tender, the grip of someone managing a situation. She let him, which was, she understood distantly, a significant concession. She did not generally let people steer her. They were 6 blocks away when the alarms started. Not sirens. The collective didn't use sirens, which would have been comprehensible. They used subsonic resonance pulses that humans felt in their teeth and their chest cavities before they consciously registered them as sound. The fog shifted. Something large moved in it 2 streets over, and then another something 1 street over. "Options," Reyes said. "Keep moving," Dara said. The words came out clear. She was holding on, threading herself through the drug's rising tide, using the hyper-clarity while it was still clarity rather than chaos. "You have 40 minutes left on that thing." 37. She could feel it now, the approaching edge, the place where the Starfall stopped being a tool and started being the whole world. "We need to not be in the open in 37 minutes. We need to not be in the open in 37 seconds. He was right. She turned them into a doorway. A building that had been a restaurant still had the faded signage above the frame, the kind of place that served things she hadn't tasted in 3 years. And they pressed into the shadow while 2 collectors passed at the end of the street, unhurried, sweeping with senses that could detect traces of collective biology at significant range. Dara realized, in the particular sharp-edged way that the Starfall was making her realize everything, that the drug in her blood was broadcasting. She was the signal. "They're following my chemistry," she said. Quiet, flat, stating it the way you state facts that are going to require you to do something very uncomfortable. Reyes's hand tightened on the interface core. He was also running the same calculation. She could see it in his face. If you get further away from me, they'll follow me and not you. That's not what I was going to say. Yes, it was. He looked at her. In the dark of the doorway, with the subsonic pulse moving through the walls and the fog pressing at the street, he looked at her the way he almost never let himself look at her, which was to say, directly, without the usual management of his own expression. They had a complicated history. They had stolen from each other. They had, on at least 3 occasions, saved each other's lives, which was a different kind of debt that neither of them had ever formally acknowledged. "The resistance needs the core," she said. "I know, you can get it there, I know you can. A beat. You've moved hot packages through worse. Not with collectors actively tracking, I'll give you a head start." She was already calculating the route, how far she needed to go, how long before the drug made the calculation irrelevant, the small arithmetic of being human and limited and stubborn in a city that kept demanding you choose between kinds of loss. 15 minutes. "Then find me." 37 minutes, he said. "You have 37. Then find me in 30. He didn't say anything. He put his hand in his jacket and took out something small, a flask, battered, the kind you kept not because you valued it, but because it had been through everything with you. He pressed it into her hand. "When this is over," he said, "you owe me noodles." She looked at the flask. She looked at him. "The noodles were terrible, I know. You owe me better ones." She almost smiled. This time she let it finish. Then she walked out into the fog, away from him, and the collectors followed her warmth and her stolen chemistry into the grey bones of the city, and Reyes walked the other direction with the interface core against his ribs, and neither of them looked back, because looking back was the kind of thing you did when you weren't sure you'd made the right call, and they were both very sure, in the way that people are sure about things they'd do again, even knowing the cost. He found her 22 minutes later, sitting on a curb 3 blocks from where she'd said to find her, which meant she'd led them on a longer route than she'd planned and run out of ground. Before she ran out of time, the flask was in her hands. Her eyes were fully gold now, blown wide, the Starfall at its peak, the world behind them painted in colors she'd forget by morning. "Core's delivered," he said, crouching beside her. She looked at him. Her expression was strange, not afraid, not triumphant, just very present, the way people get when their brain is running too fast for pretense. Did they? No, clean route. Already with Joma's crew. He sat down beside her. The curb was cold. Down the street, the fog shifted, but nothing moved in it. Whatever the collective was doing tonight, they were doing it somewhere else. "You should have told me about the interrupter. You would have objected." "Yes. And then I would have helped you figure out how to use it properly." He took the flask back, opened it, took a pull of something that tasted like turpentine, had apologized, and tried to do better. "You don't have to do everything alone, Dara." She was quiet for a moment. Around them, the city made its night sounds, generators, something distant, the ordinary mechanical persistence of people who refused to stop living in a place that had been occupied and stripped and catalogued and had not, despite all of that, stopped being home. "I know," she said finally. She didn't say it like she believed it yet, but she said it like she might eventually get there. Reyes passed her the flask. She took it, and they sat in the cold, and somewhere across the city, in a resistance cell that smelled like burned cable and old coffee, someone was already beginning to take apart a Tessava interface core and figure out what it could tell them about the network that held a world in its grip, and whether, if you knew enough of its language, you could find the frequency on which to make it listen to something it had never thought to account for, the sound of human stubbornness transmitted back.